Imagine abandoning everything you've built, your career, your security, your dreams, to be there for the person you love, even when their future seems uncertain. That's exactly what Marcus did for Martina. But what he didn't expect was that, in the middle of this journey of sacrifice and uncertainty, something so unexpected would happen that it would completely change their destiny. In the next few minutes, you will discover a real story of love, overcoming and twists and turns that no one could have predicted. But be careful. This story will challenge everything you believe about limits and the power of love. Ready to meet Marcus and Martina? So stay with me until the end, because the most surprising revelation is yet to come. Marcus held the phone to his ear, his boss's voice sounding muffled and urgent. He was so focused on the incessant stream of instructions that he didn't see the woman in front of him until it was too late. The impact was enough to make both of their coffees splash and drip onto the floor of the crowded cafe. Marcus stopped, still with the phone to his ear, looking at the stain spreading on the floor between them. "Do you always walk without looking where you're going?" the woman asked, her voice full of irritation. He blinked in surprise as he hung up the phone. It was unusual for someone to speak to him so directly. "And you always choose to get in the way of distracted people," he replied, although his expression betrayed a slight smile. She tilted her head, assessing him. His eyes had an inquisitive, almost amused gleam. "Distracted people?" Martina raised her eyebrow, holding the stained glass. "Let's be clear. You owe me a new coffee." Marcus, still holding his own empty glass, let out a restrained laugh. "I think that's fair." He gestured toward the counter. "How about I pay one, while you forgive me for the disaster?" The two walked towards the counter, still laughing at the scene. As they waited, he heard her talk about the painting she was trying to finish. There was something about the way Martina described the artistic process, the mix of passion and frustration, that fascinated him. He couldn't help but interrupt. "It seems that your art is everything to you. And it seems that your work is everything to you," she replied, with a provocative tone. "I heard half of your conversation before you ran me over." Marcus laughed, scratching the back of his head. "Okay, maybe it is. But who knows? Who knows?" He leaned towards her a little. "Maybe you should teach me how to live in the present." Martina laughed. "Start by buying a coffee without spilling, and then we'll talk." The next few minutes passed with a lightness that Marcus hadn't felt in a long time. When they finally said goodbye, he found himself looking at the door, hoping to see her again. He didn't know exactly why, but something in him told him that this wouldn't be the last time. Marcus found himself returning to the same cafe every day for the next few weeks, although he wouldn't admit even to himself that he was looking for Martina. The place had something special now, a different energy since that meeting. It was on a sunny afternoon that he saw her again, sitting at a table near the window, scribbling something in a notebook. He hesitated for a moment before approaching. "I hope no one spills coffee on you today." His voice carried a slight provocation, but his eyes shone with expectation. Martina looked up, surprised, and then smiled. "Look who's back. And this time without a phone stuck to your ear. Progress. Maybe you're a bad influence." He pulled out a chair, asking permission with a gesture. "Can I?" She hesitated for a moment, but nodded. "As long as you don't distract me too much. I'm trying to design an idea for a new painting." "I promise to be silent as a shadow," said Marcus, but he was already tilting his head to look at the drawing. The conversation flowed naturally after that. Marcus discovered that Martina worked as an art teacher for children and that she painted at night in a small studio in the apartment where she lived. She spoke about the difficulties of supporting her passion while also dealing with the bills. Marcus, on the other hand, described the corporate world he lived in, the pressure to live up to family expectations and goals that sometimes didn't even seem like his own. "It's funny, isn't it?" Martina said at one point. "You have everything anyone could want, but there seems to be something missing. Maybe there's a little color missing in my life." He laughed, but the sincerity in the sentence made Martina look up again. From that meeting on, their routine changed. They began to meet frequently, exploring the city in long conversations that made them forget about time. On one of these walks, Marcus stopped at the edge of a park and looked at her. "Have you ever thought about what it would be like to drop everything and just live what we want, without worrying about anything else?" Martina let out a low laugh. "I think about it every day. But some of us need to paint with the paint we have, Marcus." He couldn't explain why, but at that moment he understood that he wanted to be part of the picture that Martina was painting. The weeks turned into months, and the relationship between Marcus and Martina seemed to grow like a field of spring flowers. However, things began to change subtly. Martina, who had always been full of energy and determination, began to show signs of tiredness that did not correspond to her personality. At first, Marcus thought it was just the stress of routine, but it soon became clear that something more was going on. One night, while they were in their small apartment, Martina dropped a brush while painting. Marcus looked at her, worried. "Everything is fine." He stood up immediately, picking up the brush from the floor. "I'm just tired. Nothing else." Martina's voice was low, but Marcus heard the tension in her words. "Martina, this doesn't seem normal." He touched her hand gently. "How long have you been feeling like this?" She hesitated before answering. "A few weeks, maybe months." Marcus insisted that she see a doctor. After much resistance, Martina finally agreed. When the diagnosis came, it was like thunder on a clear day, a rare and progressive degenerative disease. The impact of the doctor's words seemed to echo throughout the office. Martina remained silent, her eyes fixed on the floor. Marcus squeezed her hand, as if trying to anchor her to reality. On the way back home, Martina finally broke the silence. "If you want to leave, I won't blame you." Her voice was shaking, but she tried to sound steady. "It wouldn't be fair to trap you in something that will only get worse." Marcus stopped walking, holding her by the shoulders. "Do you really think I'm going to abandon you?" He paused, looking into her eyes. "I don't know how we're going to deal with this, but we'll find a way, together." Martina was unable to respond. Silent tears ran down her face, and Marcus pulled her into a hug, trying to convey strength that he himself didn't know he had yet. The following days were full of uncertainty. Marcus began searching for information about the disease while trying to balance work and the emotional support that Martina needed. The tension was also reflected in his professional life. In an argument with his boss, he heard something that made him leave the room abruptly. "You need to decide your priorities, Marcus. You can't be distracted by personal problems." As he left, he realized he already knew what his priority was. Marcus woke up that morning with the decision made. The weight he had felt on his shoulders since Martina's diagnosis felt lighter, but he knew the road ahead would be anything but easy. After a long conversation the night before, he and Martina decided that the city and corporate life were no longer the right place for them. The priority now was her health, and more than that, living in such a way that they could find peace in the midst of the storm. The conversation with the boss was quick and definitive. "You're not thinking straight, Marcus. Throw away years of your career for something like that?" The boss's tone was more incredulity than concern. "I'm not throwing anything away. I'm choosing something that really matters." Marcus replied with a calmness that surprised him. A few days later, he sold his car, handed over his apartment, and used his savings to rent a small house in a quiet village surrounded by mountains. Martina was silent for most of the move, watching his steps with a mixture of gratitude and guilt. "Are you sure about this?" he asked as they packed the last paintings from the studio. "Absolute." Marcus stopped and held her face with both hands. Don't think for a second that I would do this if I didn't want to. You are what matters to me." The new house was modest, with old furniture and an unkempt garden. Martina looked out the window at the landscape, the mountains silhouetted against the horizon. "I don't think I've ever painted anything as beautiful as this." His voice was full of emotion. In the first few days, Marcus busied himself with tasks that would have seemed mundane before, fixing leaks, tending to the garden, and ensuring that Martina had the comfort she needed. Meanwhile, even with her weakest hands, she began painting small stones in the garden, transforming them into colourful works of art. "This is the most I can do right now," Martina commented, holding a freshly painted stone. "It's not a big deal." "It's incredible," Marcus replied, watching her with a smile, "and it will only be the beginning." At night, as they rested under the stars, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time: peace. Despite all the difficulties, their love seemed greater than ever. "I think for the first time we are exactly where we should be," he whispered, holding her hand. Martina squeezed his lightly, as if agreeing without words. Mornings in the new house began to take on a rhythm of their own. Marcus woke up early, took care of the garden, and prepared coffee before Martina got up. She, despite her limitations, started the day trying to stay active, even if it just meant painting for a few minutes. But the comfortable silence of that routine was constantly interrupted by the reality of the disease. Progress was slow, and treatment costs were high. "Marcus, we don't need to do this," Martina said one morning, after another physiotherapy session. "I know it's expensive, and I don't want you to wear yourself out like that." He closed his eyes for a moment, as if absorbing the pain of those words. Then he held her hand. "Martina, you deserve every try. I won't give up until I explore all the possibilities. Don't even think about asking me that." She didn't respond. Instead, she let him hold her, the weight of her own doubts momentarily dissolving in his strength. Marcus got a job as a handyman in the village, fixing fences, painting walls, and taking care of small repairs. At night, he worked remotely as a consultant for the company's former clients. It was exhausting, but he never let on to Martina. "You don't have to pretend like everything is fine all the time, you know," she said one night, when he collapsed on the couch after hours of work. "I'm not pretending," he replied, holding her gaze. "I only think it's worth it if it's for you." Little by little, signs of improvement began to emerge. The experimental therapy that Martina had started, although controversial, began to show results. She was able to hold her brushes more firmly and spent more time painting, regaining some of the freedom she had lost. One night, as Marcus was organizing papers on his desk, he heard Martina's voice behind him. "Marcus, look." She was holding a canvas with a landscape that captured the village's mountains. "I haven't finished something like this in months." He approached, looking at the painting. "It's beautiful. You're coming back, Martina." She smiled, excited but full of determination. "No, we're coming back." He hugged her, feeling for the first time in months that this was a milestone. They still had a long way to go, but they were heading in the right direction. The consultation that should have been routine ended up changing everything. The doctor looked at the new exams with an expression that Marcus and Martina couldn't immediately decipher. He adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat before speaking. "There is something I need to share with you." He turned the monitor so they could both see. The most recent results indicate that there was an error in the initial diagnosis. Martina's eyes widened. "A mistake?" His voice was almost a whisper. The doctor nodded. "The condition we believe to be degenerative is, in fact, a rare but treatable inflammatory syndrome. This explains the advances you have made in recent months." Marcus remained silent, absorbing those words. He felt a mixture of relief and disbelief. "So, that means she can—" He stopped, as if he couldn't complete the sentence. With proper treatment, there is a great chance of complete recovery. The doctor smiled slightly, although cautiously. There will still be challenges, but the prospects are much better than we imagined. Martina looked at Marcus, her eyes shining with a mixture of emotions. It is serious? I won't. Her voice trailed off. Marcus grabbed her hand, squeezing it tightly. You heard what he said. We will get through this. On the way home, the silence in the car was filled only by the sound of the engine and the wind through the open windows. Martina finally broke the silence. I don't know what to do with this. His voice was full of emotion. I spent months preparing for the worst, to lose everything. And now... Marcus parked the car in front of the house and turned to her. Now, Martina, you have the chance to do everything you dreamed of, to live without fear. She laughed softly, tears falling uncontrollably. It seemed so unreal. In the days that followed, optimism became part of their routine again. Martina began planning her next paintings, while Marcus took care of adjusting his finances to ensure she had the best treatment available. One afternoon, looking at the mountains, Martina held Marcus's hand. Thank you for never giving up on me, she said softly. He looked at her with a warm smile. It was never an option. The months that followed brought a new perspective to Marcus and Martina. With more targeted treatments and Martina's gradual recovery, life gained a shine that previously seemed lost. The small studio in the corner of the house once again became his refuge, and the canvases began to take on shapes and colors like never before. One morning, while Marcus was tending to the garden, Martina came in holding a newly finished canvas. He looked at her, intrigued, and wiped his hands on his pants before approaching. What is that? He asked, observing the painting. It was a village landscape, but with something more. The sky was full of vibrant colors, and two silhouettes, hand in hand, walked among the mountains. That's what I see now, Martina replied, smiling. A world full of possibilities, because you never gave up on me. Marcus looked at the screen for a long moment before pulling her into a tight hug. I just did what anyone would do for the person they love. That night, while they were having dinner, Martina suggested something that surprised Marcus. I want to share our story, she said firmly. Share how? He asked. Social media, lectures, whatever. She gestured excitedly. I think other people need to hear that it is possible to overcome the impossible, that love can work miracles. Marcus smiled, seeing the determination he loved so much in her eyes. If that's what you want, I'm with you. The following weeks were dedicated to organizing memories into words and images. Martina published her paintings online, along with short texts that narrated the difficulties and victories they had experienced. The reactions were immediate, messages of support, thanks, and stories of people who found inspiration in what they shared. Later that year, an exhibition was organized in the nearest city. Martina brought together her best works, many of which had been created in the most difficult times. The event attracted a larger audience than they imagined. In the center of the exhibition, a canvas stood out, the silhouetted landscape she had shown Marcus months before. While they were looking at the work, someone commented, "This painting sums it all up, doesn't it?" Marcus, holding Martina's hand, replied softly, "Yes, sum it up. It's about never giving up, no matter how hard it gets." And in that moment, amid the soft lights of the exhibition and the admiring murmurs of those around them, Marcus and Martina realized that the love that brought them together had also become a source of strength for many others.